the Streetlight Office, entered the library, and it ended badly for one of them. And the other two barely got out alive. That's what happened last time. Immediately what happened last time. After Mars was turned into a book. After Roland's more recent conversation with Angela, he found himself on the floor of literature, what he considered to be the most unfitting category for the city. Oh, so it's more culturally bankrupt than a museum at the start of playing any Animal Crossing game. Hoda then introduced herself, and Roland did the same, referring to himself as helper of Angela in several ways. Well, he's not discouraging Yesod's beliefs by saying that. Roland noticed how uneasy she felt and asked if she had a grudge against Angela. Hode confirmed this by saying that she is not at all friendly towards her. But because of that deal, her hands are tied. This worried Roland, as his future was making black metal seem bright and cheerful. He asked what she did to deserve this reputation. Hode told him that she'd done something unforgivable, just like she did in the past. Oh yes. This was a reference to her past as Michelle, another research assistant of Lobotomy Corporation. One that Carmen apparently treated well. But she was also a spy for the head, possibly one of the eyes, put in place to keep track of Lobotomy Corporation and to notify them of anything that could be a threat to them. When the Cogito experiments went badly, resulting in the deaths of Elijah, Gabriel, Giovanni, and Enoch, not all of them due to Cogito exposure, she reported these experiments and the ultimate goal of them, which resulted in a massacre that almost destroyed the Lobotomy Corporation, or at least that lab in the outskirts that they were in. She was dead some time after, but not by Ian's hand. She was then reborn as Hode, and she helped to create the Seed of Light by overcoming her own trauma. As for what Angela did, it likely involved the interruption of the Seed of Light. I mean, it was meant to go on for a week, not 3 days. Anyway, Roland understood enough to know that the library was as up as its staff, even though they dealt with what was weighing them down in the past. When asked if it will ever be resolved, Hode said that she didn't have that answer, but the results will eventually be seen, as there is a clear end to that deal, if Angela's journey is followed to the end. That's what worries me. Her intentions are unclear. What's to stop her from discarding those that have outlasted their usefulness? Well, we'll find out eventually. As for Roland, he's frustrated, as he has both guests and librarians to deal with. All he wants to be is a good friend with them. Good luck with getting your son to be that. Hode then mentioned that she'd be sorting through the literature of the city. Based on Roland's remark, that wouldn't take that long. She also mentioned that, as the books are collected, he might be able to find answers to his questions regardless of his preference to do so. Roland was irritated by this and realized why Angela hated it when people didn't get to the point. Then, after Hode was supportive of Roland, he left with sarcastic thanks to her. What an a**hole. She was just trying to be friendly and helpful. What about the Streetlight Office? Not all of its members were accounted for. Let's go back to them, shall we? While Lulu and San got back to their fixer office alive, San blamed himself for the job becoming like the popularity of the Beatles in the US after they said that they were more popular than Jesus in 1966. Even Lulu was mourning his death. San sent a report to the Zwei and told her that their office was off the case. Lulu took it the worst and asked if Mars's death was pointless. San was apologetic to her and said that if she wanted to blame him, she can, as their specialization was peacekeeping, not exploration or offensive combat. There are likely to be associations for those as well. As he was saying this, Lulu noticed a cake in the fridge, a cake that San didn't buy. This made Lulu want to go outside, as it was clearly too painful to talk about that. That cake being a reminder of what she had lost. It was raining outside, but Lulu didn't care about that. She let out the grief that she was keeping inside, all the frustration. She spoke of his mother and the sword that was hers, how he wanted to be like her someday. She then resolved to enter the library herself to retrieve his book and avenge his death. She didn't tell San about this, as he would try and stop her if she did. So after finding an invitation and gathering her friends, the door appeared. Roland found that scene to be heartbreaking and regretted seeing that. Angela found it funny, considering his speech on how fixers shouldn't have bonds with each other. He said, "That's that, and this is this," and told her that reacting to every bit of loss is a waste of energy, clearly seeing his own problems as enough to deal with as it is, which he briefly mentioned. He also considered it rude to watch something like that without the listener's consent, as it would result in learning about something that they didn't have to know. People have enough in their emotional baggage to deal with by themselves, and telling them your sob story will make it as if you're showing that off. Although there is some sympathy, it also displeased them as it reminds them too clearly of their own problems. I mean, you were concerned about that now? After dealing with 7 full groups of guests and part of one group so far? The bit slow in the realization, aren't you? What a selfish hole. As if we need any reminders of that. Apparently, it's why he believes in not overexpressing feelings and choosing words carefully when saying goodbye. Well, it's considerate to him. This sounded even more tiring to her. Roland then went on to say that he shouldn't let his feelings get in the way of his work there, most of all, or to gather books about the city. Angela agreed with him, as she'd dispose of him as soon as she sees that he's outlasted his usefulness. Yeah, that arouses my suspicions, that she wouldn't let him live a second longer than he's useful. Knowing that, Roland decided to go back to his duties for the sake of his own survival. As with an ally like Angela, enemies are redundant. After that, Lulu arrived in the library, and upon seeing Angela, she attacked her. Upon her greeting, and told the despicable piece of junk to shut up. She was there to get Mars's book, kill all within the library, and take her head clean off. Something which Angela said that Lulu would have difficulty in doing so, largely because of how durable she is. Lulu then repeated her demand for Angela to shut up, and then Lulu and her friends went into the library proper. They didn't come out of it, leaving San as the sole surviving fixer of the Streetlight Office. Yeah, that's not going to have a positive effect on his mental health, will it? What will it lead to? Well, that'll be realized eventually. Just not during that reception. After the reception, Angela asked if Roland felt any guilt or strong emotions. Roland told her that he'd be lying if he felt nothing. He was desensitized to cheap tragedies due to seeing how so many of them. As a certain fictional warlord would put it in a cheesy video game movie adaptation, for him, it's Tuesday. He's even been on the receiving end of some of them. Angela noticed that he didn't sound like a washed-up fixer, but a rather seasoned veteran. He had his reasons not to go on about that. Although Angela was curious about this, she didn't press him for answers, nor did she decide to turn him into a book and read his story, much to Roland's unease. As for her, she's indifferent after seeing relationships and scripted deaths that would never get past the censors of a Final Fantasy game. She's seen this too many times. It's why she wanted a system where people were free to choose their own destiny, free from any coercion. A system that apparently doesn't extend to the librarians, as they were recruited through coercion. The kind that's done at gunpoint. As in, do this, or you become a book. As for Roland, he understands that they knew what they were agreeing to when they signed the invitation, but he still feels conflicted about that, as he considers it dirty, as Angela is unable to be killed, and death is a temporary setback for the librarians. This is even though it's more polite and fair than most things in the city. Next we have Hood's first abnormality. Today's shy look. Now this abnormality is an interesting one, as the damage it deals and the effect that it applies depends on which face is in play at the time, selected from a row of them. The happier the face, the least harmful it is to the one being attacked. This one started with an inhabitant of the city finding it difficult to express their emotions. They had an expression that wasn't recommended in the city, well, certainly in a nest. They were told to be considerate of others. All that pressure, all that demanding, until finally they dried their own skin, as they dried their laundry and made masks out of it. Where this satisfied the others. That sounds like a failing of society, demanding that everyone act as expected, even if they don't feel like it. A good thing that the Botany Corporation extracted them when they did. Otherwise, this individual could have gone Joker on those that tormented them. As for how they act as a humanoid figure stained in blood, and wearing a mask made from their own skin. When they're joyous, they want to share their apparent happiness while they're smiling. They make the excuse that they're just shy and asks if they look better. When neutral, they just can't be bothered. When sad, they plead at others not to look behind her last refuge out of common decency, and why a sad look doesn't fit the city. When angry, she shouts out profanity with an anger more explosive than Lulu's. As for Hode, what she thinks of this, she understood that she needed to be considerate of her mood. Today's Shy Look stage is a yard that had grass with a house with a stone wall. The sky was blue. There were some boxes and a tree in the background. Sounds like a nice place to live, doesn't it? Well, that was before today's Shy Look appeared. There's two of them. One that's fought and the other behind the mounted net of skin masks, from joyous to angry. Yeah, not a lot of choice in that, is there? The outskirts aren't really monitored, but it's largely out of even fixer hands. The back streets are where the syndicates are largely in charge, and anything goes between a certain time in the night of the back streets. As for the nest, standards of living are higher, but there are expectations. Hode gains the power of today's Shy Look and an additional librarian to help her out, after this abnormality was defeated. And once she returned to the floor of literature, Roland brought some books to her. He told her that She didn't need to be so courteous and not be so formal towards him. She then becomes more informal, although she felt awkward doing so. Roland wasn't sure that the city had anything worth being called literature. And I can understand that. Hode considered each person's life as counting as a work of literature, more like tragic comedies and horror stories. She considered comedy and tragedy intertwining in a complex way. She understands enough about morality to understand that it's hard to define at times, where black and white morality, as in either purely good or purely evil, doesn't really work in that world. Those that have gone through the story of Lobotomy Corporation will understand this already, or something similar. As for Roland, what he has to say about this, he explained that, well, everyone had their own affairs, which was why Hode questioned if it was okay to blindly hate someone. She talks about the Streetlight Office. They were like a happy family, whom they killed to get their books. Although she understands it was their choice to come there, and she understands what was needed, although she's still not feeling okay about it. She caught herself when she felt like she was making excuses for herself, as she did before. As for what Roland thinks, he's actually quite restrained this time, at least by his standards. He believes that taking everyone's personal affairs into consideration is a headache waiting to happen. Something just as confusing as not thinking about it at all. He saw thinking about moral standards and causality would make things blurry. And in that city, who could blame him? Based on what's known so far, it would mean more emotional baggage than she knows how to handle, advising that she should go straight to where her heart leads to, without any need to learn or know any further. Now Hode, upon hearing this was revealing. As based on what Roland had just said, she observed that this was the advice from a seasoned fixer. Angela isn't the only one to notice that he's not being entirely honest about him being washed up. Roland then said his favourite phrase. That's that, and this is this. As in, don't embrace everyone's private matters, as that's the kind of world that they don't live in. He came to terms with reality long ago, that you should just keep going with life wherever it leads. She thanked him for the advice, but remarked that his phrase might give comfort for a short while, but it's not one that would redeem a life. It was his way of interpreting things. Others might have different ways. Roland then left the floor of literature after that. It was then the library became an urban legend. Roland understood that stronger guests would arrive soon, due to the library becoming an urban legend. Urban myths being as common as kimchi, where it's hard to tell what's real and what's made up, and can end up being as boring as snail racing, once the truth behind them is found. This annoyed Angela, and she said that associations designating them with a higher grade would attract better guests with more valuable information. Which was what Roland was trying to say. He confirmed this, and it would make the library worth the attention of more people. Roland then went on to talk about his grandmother, who told him spine-chilling stories about urban legends. He then caught himself talking about his past and stopped himself. As for what Angela thought about it, well, she asked about that. He told her that he lost his family. His parents were lost before he could remember. His grandmother disappeared without notice sometime after. He then stopped when he was about to talk about something else, saying that it was nothing special. He then asked Angela about their goal to get that one book that would give Angela her freedom. She confirmed this, as she wanted the freedom to leave the library and to live as herself. She also wanted to forget the trauma. When asked if freedom was the reason why she was collecting the books, she stated that Roland was half right. She could pick up fragmented information about the outside world. Well, when she was underground. The same stories over and over again. She wanted to hear new stories. It's like having only the complete works of Shakespeare to read, and you're forced to read it over and over again because there's nothing else. She also wants to see new faces. Well, she's certainly getting that. She also wanted vengeance. Vengeance against Ian and the world that made her what she was. This worries me. So she wants to make the world burn, rather than watch it burn, as a certain fictional butler would put it. She called him abominable, and yet she's doing more or less the same things under a veil of politeness and fairness. And she called Malkuth a hypocrite. As far as she was concerned, her freedom would be complete only when she has destroyed everything he dreamed for. If it was true that he only cared about his own redemption, granting it to others was a byproduct of that. And if you want to destroy what could save humanity, it's not just the late Stephen Hawking that saw the dangers of AI. Anyone else starting to think that Angela and AI similar to her were made illegal for good reasons? As for how this is possible, it involves following where the red invitation leads. It guides Angela to the book, but she doesn't know how this will be achieved. All she knows is that once she has that book with everything that she wants to know, all will be resolved. It's a bit vague, and it hints that She's not entirely in control, as if she was to begin with. As she said that she only borrowed the power of the invitation. The library has infinite space and can extract endless books, but the red invitation negates the need to be inefficient about it, and without the need to collect books with mostly useless information in them. By acquiring specific books, well, Angela doesn't really care what happens. She'd be satisfied as long as the results were achieved. Yeah. The ends justify the means kind of person. Now, this hints at issues that remain unresolved. Issues that can eat away at anyone that can keep them within. It can be all consuming if it lets them. And based on her experiences, it's a miracle that she was able to maintain some degree of sanity. Although the trauma remained. How this would develop, well, we'd see. As for what Roland thinks of this, well, Roland was skeptical. And I can understand why he would be. As for me, I don't think that she'll guess what she wants in a way that she does want. As what she might imagine, it might not match reality. And this is an android that perceives the world at 1% normal speed. Basically, she's thinking normally while everything else, including her movements, it's like moving through, oh, I know, a giant fruitcake. It's incredibly difficult to do so. Anyway, it's likely to result in disappointment in the end, where this vengeance will likely be a Pyrrhic victory. A victory that's about as bitter as defeat, if not more so. Roland had at least part of the right idea. As for the rest, that's open for debate. And something that can wait for another time, as there are other things for him to deal with. Roland then entered the floor of arts and found Nezhak, the patron librarian of that floor, lying on the floor, seemingly apathetic and unmotivated, based on the fact that the books were all over the floor. There are good reasons for this, as he used to be Giovanni. One that used to be in the care of Carmen's company, either when she was around in the Botany Corporation or the company that she was with previously. A bit hard to tell, but he volunteered for the Cogito experiments, believing that it might help Carmen, his friend. Ian knew that she was dead, but he left him with that false hope. The Cogito testing killed him, and then he was reborn as Nezhak, an apathetic junkie that got high on chemicals as a means of escape from a terrible reality. After overcoming his trauma, or at the very least coming to terms with his past, he contributed to the seed of light. Although some habits died hard. Certainly in his case, considering where he was, as Roland found where he was. He was probably thinking, this is going to be a difficult one to deal with. Roland kept pestering Nezhak until he got up, as he might not be motivated, but Roland was. Angela would not be pleased with him if he didn't cooperate. The messy patron librarian then asked if he knows how it felt to give everything he had to make something, only to see it completely break. A sandcastle swept away by waves. Roland correctly guessed that he was referring to Angela ruining their work. Nezhak then went on to speak of taking charge of work that he didn't want, again, twice in as many lives, and then told him to leave him alone as he wanted to sleep. Roland asked how everyone hated Angela so much. Now, this question, it motivated Nezhak at least enough to get him to stand up, who then asked how he ended up there, and actually pitied Roland. After some proper introductions, Nezhak asked how he ended up with the kind of work that didn't suit him at all. Yeah. Based on that rhetorical question, no wonder you're apathetic. As for Roland, he understood, as he didn't expect to be in a library. He understood that art books were needed on that floor. Not that Nezhak cared that much. As he laid back down, Roland asked if he was going to do his work. Nezhak didn't see much of a choice in this. He should be used to it by now. Except in this case, the one causing the torment isn't doing it under orders. The main difference between one master and another is one was human and the other was not. In the urban legend, section of this little breakdown series. There will be some familiar individuals, others not so much. Until next time. Hail the rabbits!